Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics, setting up the 116th Yates Cup, as well as looking at the other championship games across all of U Sports. We're going to give you our picks. We're going to talk about the All-Star nods that came out just today at time of recording, and so much more. But first and foremost, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, my man. I'm doing well. Don't let anybody say that we don't listen to our fans. We asked all of you if you preferred having both a preview pod and the live show. You said you wanted both, so we're giving you both here. We're only for the people.
And for the person who said they just wanted the live show, just super curious. Who are you and why did you only want the live show? We're willing to give you more content for the great price of zero. So anyhow, again, as Tom said, we appreciate the feedback as always. And as we mentioned on the review podcast coming off the semifinals, if you missed that, if you forgot that, we are going to be live and direct from Wilfrid Laurier University Stadium for the Yates Cup, doing our game day live Yates Cup edition. Tom, just off the jump, before we get into all the amazing things we want to talk about in this podcast, just what do we need to let the people know about that?
Yeah, same process as we have been. We are going to be live at 11 a.m., but with a little bit of a twist here. We have partnered with our good friend, Mario Ayaz, and a company that he's involved with called Millions.co. We will be live streaming there. And one of the many amazing features about Millions is that when we live stream there, they actually allow us to live stream about a bunch of different platforms all at once. You'll get the best HD version of our live stream if you go to Millions.co and you look up At the 55 podcast. But if you go on to YouTube, we should be on Instagram and on Twitter or X for the folks out there as well. So you'd be catching us there. The quality might not be 100% because we're streaming from a different service and that's being broadcast out, but you'll still get to see our beautiful faces break down all U Sports football. So what more do you want?
And you'll be able to hear the takes that we're throwing out about all the games that we have coming up this weekend. So be sure to tune in for that. And for everyone that's been tuning in from out of province, folks that have reached out to us from RSCQ, from CanWest, AUS, hey, we really appreciate that you're checking in with what we're doing here. And just we appreciate the support. So again, always here for any feedback you have for us and whatever we can do to bring you a better product to cover the sport. And let's start with talking about major award winners, because that's certainly the news of the day. It's what everyone is talking about going into the Yates Cup. I believe the other conferences have the breakdown, though we will do our C2C. We're going to keep it just to our OUA award winners. So allow me to start with the major award winners, then into the All-Stars. We'll go out one by one, and then we'll have our discussion thereafter. Starting with major award winners, you're now two-time back-to-back OUA MVP is one Taylor Elgersma. We did the math earlier in the year. The first back-to-back MVP since about 20 years ago when Tommy Dennison was doing it for the Queens Golden Gales. Shout out to Big 13 there. See if he can pick up a bit of other hardware this weekend as well. Outstanding stand-up defensive player goes to Jackson Finley, free safety on the Western Mustangs. Lineman of the year, Eric Anderson, also of the Western Mustangs. The Norm Marshall Award going to Jackson Taylor of the Master Marauders, that being for rookie of the year. We will talk about Tayshawn Jackson, who, as we were proven incorrect, was not in fact a rookie. But shout out to Jackson Taylor for the great year he put together. The Russ Jackson Award, which kind of just goes to the just overall good dude in academic, stand-up, classy guy, involvement in the community and being a good athlete, goes to our guy Ben Miracle for the Ottawa Gee-Gees. The David Tuffy Knight Award for Coach of the Year, now also pairing with his quarterback going back-to-back in the past 2 years, is one Michael Faulds for Wilfrid Laurier University. Volunteer Coach of the Year goes to PJ Edgeworth of the Western Mustangs. Champion of EDI Award goes to Kwabena Nana Gyama out of the Ottawa Gee-Gees program. And to wrap up the major award winners, the Ken Green Officials Award of Merit goes to Kevin Baird. Tom, give me a quick thumbs up if we pause there. We just go through all the All-Stars and then do the commentary.
Well, let's pause here just for a quick second to talk about everything. Once again, congratulations to all of our major award winners here. This is outstanding. Love to see Ben Miracle's name on there. I know that he didn't have the best end well, he didn't have the best season just in general, but we have nothing but respect for the guy, and just to see him on this board was an amazing thing. Um, Also, Jackson Taylor, my guy from McMaster, awesome, fantastic. Couple of things in here, one in particular that I'm a little surprised at, and it's one Coach Michael Faulds from Wilfrid Laurier. There is arguably nobody else more deserving in this conference than Coach Michael Faulds for this award. I don't want to take anything away from him. I have the most admiration and respect for that man that I could possibly imagine. But when you look at what Coach Soria did with those Guelph Griffins, taking a team from 3-5 that missed the playoffs into a 6-2 actual contender that went toe to toe with Western for a good chunk of that game, I was very surprised to see that his name was not on here. Once again, nothing, absolutely nothing against Coach Michael Faulds because he deserves this, absolutely. But just very surprising not to see Coach Soria there.
Yeah, I mean, and no one should be surprised to hear us saying that because we've been calling for it to be Coach Soria for weeks now since the regular season ended, and there's so many ways to look at it from the standpoint of, well, for Coach Faulds, who we are so immensely grateful for, just the opportunities that we've been able to do at Laurier and being able to do these game day lives, just our appreciation for him as a football player, Tom's favorite like sporting event of all time, the 2009 Yates Cup, for which he's the absolute legend, limping back on that field with the torn ACL and everything magical like that. And again, for the amazing job that we know he's done. And this is a Laurier team that in this decade, starting with the shortened year in 2021, they go 3-3, then they go 5-3, and then 7-1, and to the 8-0 record. And it just, I don't know, like it's, again, different strokes for different folks. There's obviously nothing wrong with giving it to the guy who, like, in theory, it's like, well, if he won it last year and the only thing his team couldn't do was beat Western, they did everything again this year and then they beat Western. So, I mean, what do you want from it? It's got back-to-back MVP on his team. They returned nearly 12 for 12 on that offense. That defense is really good. And Coach Van Moorkirk, and I don't know. I don't want to seem like a Laurier hater on this. I'm certainly not a Coach Faulds hater, and obviously it works into me being the Guelph, alumni and all things like that for me to be calling it for Coach Soria. But when you have a team that has that flip and you have everything else, seemingly everything else, a few new faces here and there, of course, for Guelph, and then not just the record turned around, but there's just this like immense positivity around the program. It's tough. It's tough. I don't know. I won't say more about it than that. Again, I'm not going to take away from Coach Faulds. He's forgotten more about football than I'll ever know in my life. And you know what? To the Jackson Taylor Award, just allow me to say that again. Take a victory lap, Tom. Absolutely. And I know I rubbed it in your face a little bit when we did our game day live from Mac when you first claimed that he was going to win Rookie of the Year. And honestly, I'm right there with you had I known that Tayshaun Jackson wasn't eligible for it. What a great year he put together. Outstanding job all around there. Anything else in terms of and shout out to our guy, Jackson Finley. What I'll add on with that one is the thought of, for a guy to be replacing a former stand-up defensive player of the year award winner, not from last year, but 2 years ago in Daniel Valente Jr. So for a guy in Jackson Finley to fill in his shoes and then win it again, it speaks to the program, the development, what the Western Mustangs do, obviously what Coach Gleason does. But shout out to Jackson Finley on that one.
Yeah, I was just going to say the last few things that I want to say. I mean, we have to shout our guy, Taylor Elgersma, for winning back-to-back MVP.
100%.
What an incredible season. He absolutely deserves that. Jackson Finley is one of those guys that if you are not a Western fan, I'm sure you must just loathe this man, not because of who he is, but almost not because of what you think, I should say, because typically hey, you know what, Western guys, they're all cocky, they're all this and that, whatever. No, Jackson Finley is genuinely one of the nicest human beings I've ever met in my life. He's one of the best safeties I've ever seen. Form tackling is incredible. He's freaking brilliant with the courses that he's going into, and he gives back to his community every single chance he gets. There is nothing that you can hate about this young man, and yet he still plays for one of the best teams in the country and is playing at the highest of levels in that regard. So, wow, so happy for him, so happy for that whole family that he gets the recognition. And of who would we be if we didn't shout out the lineman of the year going to Eric Anderson, the anchor on that Western O-line at left tackle. Congratulations, sir. What an awesome achievement.
Yeah, and again, just going back to all the things you were just saying about Jackson Finley, he's the type of guy that, like, it could be winning a Russ Jackson award at the same time. And I don't know if they've ever handed out two of those to a defensive player of the year and a Russ Jackson, or most valuable and a Russ Jackson, but certainly that caliber of guy. Let's go through the All-Stars, because we certainly have some comments about these as well. I will read through the first team and then the second team in order, and then we will have our comments afterwards. First team All-Stars, starting at the quarterback position, Taylor Elgersma, of course, Wilfrid Laurier University. Running backs, Jared Kasari and Charles Asselin are king. At receiver, we have Seth Robertson, Raiden Thorne, Ethan Jordan, and Kasim Ferdinand. For the fullback, tight end, H-back position is Sebastian Parcelidis out of Laurier. On the offensive line, center goes to Alex Berwick out of Western. Offensive tackles are Eric Anderson and Cooper Hamilton out of Western and Laurier, respectively. Guards are Josh Reitveld out of Laurier and Mitchell Schretchinger out of Guelph. On the defensive side, the defensive line, one of the fearsome looking defensive lines we can ever have imagined putting together, includes the likes of Darian Newell out of Queens, Max von Muhldorfer out of Western, and at defensive ends, Kaladi Amusin and Ife Onyeka out of Carleton. At the linebackers, we have Justin Pace and Riley McLeod with Anthony Moore Tuzo filling in at Sam. At free safety, of course, it is Jackson Finley. Defensive halfbacks include Robert Springer out of Windsor and Jahari Hastings out of Laurier. Cornerbacks, they have Richard Adubafor from Western, and Esteban Acebo-Datsi out of Windsor. The punter goes to Michael Horvat from Mac. The kicker goes to Brian Garrity. The returner goes to Tayshawn Jackson from Laurier, and the rush cover goes to Caleb Sargent from the Guelph Griffins. Second team All-Stars, quarterback Keegan Hall out of the McMaster Marauders. Running backs, Tanner Nelms and Donovan Malloy. The second team receiving core is Tristan Reddy, Bashan Genesis, Willem Arsenault, and Nathan Falcone. Fullback, tight end, H-back goes to Mateo Triffin from Windsor. On the offensive line, center goes to Ethan Pyle from Guelph. Offensive tackles are Patrick Lavoie out of Carleton and Tristan Fortin out of Ottawa. The guards are Philip Cote from Western and Owen Mueller out of Windsor. On the defensive side of the ball, the defensive line lists Malik George from Windsor, Robert Keys Wilson from Guelph, Salas Hubert, and Soren Hallschmidt from the Western Mustangs. The linebacking core is Devin Verisic from Windsor, Peyton Ryder from York, and Brody Clark, his fellow Lion, filling out that linebacking core at the Sam position. On the defensive back side of things, Kevin Victome is sliding in at free safety out of Ottawa, along with his partner in crime, Patrick Cumberbatch, going at the halfback position, along with Queen's Golden Gale, Keegan Vanek for the other halfback. Your second team corners are Denny Ferdinand from Ottawa and Kyle Simon Guerin for Guelph. Special teams, punter goes to Cole Crossett from Waterloo. Kicker goes to Michael Horvat. Your returner is Ian St. Arnaud. And your rush cover goes to DJ Ryan from the Queens Golden Gales. Tom, should I just quickly read through all rookies, or should we pause on that? All rookies, and it's a representative from each club. Obviously, from the Master Marauders, it is Jackson Taylor. From Windsor, it is linebacker Marco Piccioni. It is the offensive lineman from Queens, Simon Doncaster. From Wilfrid Laurier, it is defensive lineman Mateo LaQuintana. For the offensive lineman from York, Jaden Savage. From the University of Toronto, it's defensive back Oscar McPhee. From the Carleton Ravens, it's offensive lineman Jeff Hudson. From Guelph, they send defensive back Evan Lakatos. From Western, it's defensive back Tommy Silcox. From Waterloo, they send defensive lineman Jack Lausch. And from the Ottawa GGs, wide receiver Romeo Lucier. Folks, those are your first and second team OUA All-Stars and your all-rookie team. Tom, let me pass it to you if for no other reason to take a drink of water. We certainly have some thoughts on this, and I think it starts with that second team quarterback position perchance. But I pass you the floor.
Yes, outstanding job by you running through all those names in succession here. We'd be so first and foremost, you see the McMaster stuff behind me. Very, very, very happy to see Keegan Hall get the recognition that he does deserve because of the outstanding season that he had. And he really was that entire offense for McMaster, for sure. Hard to overlook Evan Hillock, though. Hard to overlook the fact that with 83 less completions, he's got 7 more touchdowns and 2 fewer interceptions. Hard to overlook that. Also, shocking. And I tried to go back in the history books, but this is a little bit more difficult to really tie down. When was the last time that an all-star, an OUA all-star list came out where no Western Mustang quarterback and no Western Mustang running backs on first or second team in the past number of years, with how dominating those teams have been from Western year after year after year? So very surprising not to see any of those guys. Now, running backs, I feel, is a little bit more justified when you look at the names on the list here, but certainly very surprised not to see Mr. Evan Hillock on there, despite how incredibly happy I am for Keegan Hall.
Yeah. I was saying this to you, and I think we are such a deep and talented league now because
Mhm.
there's some guys on the defensive side who aren't on either of these lists that we'll talk about briefly. I think we're at a point now where it might screw up like looking at OUA history, but frankly, the history books aren't like that thorough enough for it to really feel like, oh, well, if all of a sudden we added a third team OUA All-Star without, oh, well, then what about all these guys who didn't get, like, look, the history books aren't that great. If we're starting now really want to be thorough with it, then let's start that now. Again, it's tough. And shout out to Keegan Hall, like record setting year he was doing. You can play that game if he was playing for Western, then what would he do? I love that you highlighted the comparative numbers in terms of what Evan did with fewer attempts. And so maybe you just say, well, yeah, because he had more offense to be able to then say, just hand the ball off to some of your running backs. But as we saw, well, it's not like he has OUA All-Star running backs. Well, I mean, he does, and a former MVP. Oh man, it's a bad beat, and frankly, I think that if you're the Laurier Golden Hawks, on the one hand, again, and shout out to all the Golden Hawks that made that list. Whether they believe in poking the bear or anything like that, we already talked about them poking the bear just by beating Western in the regular season. Western not getting some of those nods on this list. I can imagine you talk about, bulletin board material. That might be some of it. Hey, on some of the positives though,
Hmm.
I love, and it made all the sense in the world, but I love Tristan Reddy
Yes.
making this list because you know what, at the end of the day he only ends up with the 2 touchdowns. He added in a special teams touchdown, obviously, for him to make it as the receiver. All they should be taking into account are his receiving yards. At the end of the day, when you look at what him and Kasim Ferdinand did, Kasim gets a few more touchdowns, and 6 touchdowns to 2, that's obviously nothing to sneeze at. Tristan just surpasses him in the yards, and this is a receiving core where it very much was the going into this year of Kasim Ferdinand and friends, because he added guys like Brown and Hatchie into that mix as well with that receiving core, along with Reddy with this all Canadian and Kasim Ferdinand. This year, it's a 1A, 1B. Reddy and Ferdinand is this two-headed monster with that young kid Elijah Barnes slinging the ball out. I think that's an awesome selection to be able to see. Love the running backs. That first team with Charles Asselin, with Jared Kasari, so much comparison that we can say between the nature of how they had to pull their teams along with all the injuries, with all the turmoil at the quarterback positions and going back and forth and everything else that went on. So a lot of positives from that standpoint. Should we look at the defensive side, or what other comments do you have on the offense?
The last thing that I'll say about offense and keeping this in a positive light is that I loved, similar to how you love Tristan Reddy, I loved Nathan Falcone from Queens getting the shout out there
Yeah.
because he's gone through three different quarterbacks. One in Alex Vreekin, Anthony Leo came in through a lot of it, and then obviously in the ending of that Windsor game, you had Russell Weir there. And despite all of that, he still put up impressive numbers and he was still doing his thing. So I love that we got the shout out from him as well. I Of course, shout out to the big boys up front. You don't get nearly as much recognition as you possibly deserve, but this is something of a here's some recognition for all of the hard work that you do. There's obviously not enough people who are watching just purely the offensive line for people to really go above and beyond here. But the one thing that I will say is I'm surprised we didn't get a little bit more recognition from that Guelph offensive line. You and I were talking about how we really thought that that was the best offensive line in the OUA and potentially in all of U sports. Now, obviously, Western was able to do some things in that playoff game, but still, I was just surprised to see that we only got two. But I mean, it's still 2 out of the 5 who got recognition. So, you know, it is what it is, but just happy for all of those offensive linemen getting their shout outs.
Most certainly. And you know, the only thing I guess I'll add in as well is to think that, you know, you look at again, I love you shouting out Falcone. I think the Western folks might have a beef if they want to look at their guy Mohsen Jamal not making that list. And you know what? As much as we love Vashon Genesis, I think if you were gonna say who would be the one that might be on the cusp there, again, you look at the seasons they had, Vashon missing a bit of time. I ain't complaining with him getting on the list, and he's certainly deserving. But again, more reason why Western might be coming to this game being like, you know, to quote the person we believe is Eric Anderson's grandmother, quit sleeping on the Western Mustangs. Let's look at the defensive side of things. I said it in reading through it. I love seeing that dynamic duo in the linebacking core of Peyton Ryder and Brody Clark slotting in on the second team defensive side there. Brody obviously missed a couple games, but you know, like you watch the tape, we've talked about so many times. Sam linebackers in Greg Knox defenses tend to do well, but it's that much more bolstered when they themselves are ballers. And we were watching him closely all year long, along next to that muscle hamster and Peyton Ryder, and that's a great duo. Love to see what how that is going to play out for them in the future. And I'll pass it over to you on this comment. I know there's a lot of things we want to talk about on the defensive side of the ball. You know, we talked about with Richard Adu before in terms of, you know, him moving into half and where's he going to get recognized. And they wound up giving him corner, which, you know, great, cool, fine, no problem there. But as far as guys playing some somewhat different positions, big shout out to Kevin Victome for Ottawa, going from playing corner and a guy who, like, we even talked about, like, great in coverage, doesn't always seem like he wants to be the first guy, like the last line of defense making a tackle, just a classic shutdown corner type, but, you know, don't mind run the ball at him. For him to move into free safety, where very much you're obviously still in coverage, but you're having to have a much more intensive role, helping and run stopping and things like that. And he had a great year. I love for him getting the pickup here. Tom, what are some of your thoughts with the defensive guys here?
Well, you and I were talking about it before we started the podcast. Very surprising not to see Max Nixon
Yeah.
on this. Very surprising indeed. I think the way that they do the linebackers is that you have two linebacker spots that can be Will or Mac, and then the Sam is always the Sam because Sam linebackers are very different from what you would ask from a Mac and a Will for the most part. Surprising not to see Max Nixon for sure, but super happy that my dude Justin Pace gets his recognition. Riley McLeod as well, playing some outstanding football. And Mortuzo getting the shout out at Sam of the first team. He's been doing some fantastic work once again. So very happy to see all of those guys there. Yeah, I want to double back. Peyton Ryder and Brody Clark. So awesome to see you guys on this list. I think Devin Verisig definitely deserves to be on here. He's played some outstanding football, leading in a lot of tackling categories, I believe, for the team as well. And just doing his thing. I mean, you don't have move the heck out of my way a Gelly in front of you. You do have Malik George, who obviously was doing great, and that Windsor D line is no joke. but having to take on a couple more offensive linemen that you normally would have if you had Mufta in front of you and still getting this recognition, I think speaks very highly to this young man and his capabilities, most definitely. I mean, when you look at this entire defense from first team and second team, you go, yeah, that's an absolutely terrifying defensive secondary, most definitely. I don't want to throw into either of them. But seeing Richard Adu before getting some recognition, obviously from his corner position, but also playing a little bit of half, he really could have gotten either one. But you look at Jahari Hastings and Robert Springer and the stuff that they were doing. Of course, they have to get proper shout outs here as well. Love to see Estevan Acebo-Dotsi get the other corner position as well. I think he was really an unsung hero a lot of the time with Windsor, certainly from our standpoint, because once again, if you're a great defensive back and you're really doing your work, you don't get talked about a lot because people don't throw your way. The only thing that I will say about this, and you and I once again talked about this as well, no Ashton Miller
Mhm.
Melanson. We do see Keegan Vanek on this as the second team fullback, or sorry, halfback, but very surprising not to see Ashton Miller Melanson on this list.
And you know what? Again, that's where I think that you look at some of you just without even saying like, well, who are you going to take off? Which obviously we're big proponents of, where it's like if you think someone's better, it should be higher on any list. Well, then you got to name names of who should be lower in that case. But where you could perhaps say you have such a great opportunity to have a whole third team defense where you think about some of those Guelph interior linemen who aren't on this list. You mentioned Miller Melison's name, a guy like Chris Toupin out of Carleton, what he was doing
Mm-hmm.
there in the linebacking core, a guy like Ethan John out of
Mm-hmm.
Windsor. Obviously, they're getting a lot of recognition not having him in there. Max Nixon, even a guy like Michael Omaseni,
Yeah.
not being on this list. I'm trying to think of some of the other. No Malik Cote,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's just like, and it's a spoil of riches, and why it's such a pleasure to get to call and just talk about all the great people that make this league what it is. But yeah, like that's where it's just like, man, oh man, so many of these guys who just don't get that recognition, at least from in this capacity, where it just feels like, hey, I mean, we can just just keep it positive, right? We're just the spoils of riches that we have to be able to look at this. Um, I don't know if you have any other commentary on that. I know I had brought it up when we were discussing that. Hey, Michael Horvat, you punt the hell out of the ball, and much in the same way that we looked at, with Keegan Hall getting an All-Star nod. Well, really had to rely on him. Well, that was a team that wasn't really one to execute all that well in the red zone by the numbers. So yeah, Horvat's going to score some points. No Dawson Hodge. Ah, man. And again, maybe that's just the primetime example of, he's that third string kicker or that third, pardon me, all-star kicker in the mix of that. But I think the context matters as much as the numbers when you have to compare some of these guys. And you think about a guy in Dawson who, when you compare him and Horvat, because Horvat was that, wins 2 All-Star awards. And again, shout out to him, like big ups to him. You have two guys who've pretty well scored the same amount of points on the year. It's 75 for Horvat. It's 74 for Hodge. It's it's 6 more field goals being made for Horvat. It's what, 17 more extra points being made for Hodge. And so in some ways it's like, okay, yeah, sorry, Dawson, your team scored when they got into the other team's half of the 55, as opposed to having to settle for field goals. And that's obviously not Horvat's fault. When they call him out there, all he can do is do his job. And he's had a slightly better percentage than Dawson as well on more kicks. It's just, again, it's the context of it where it's like, that's just a bad beat for Hodge to be the kicker on the team that goes undefeated, and you're pretty darn consistent all year long. He's perfect on his extra points. He misses 4 field goals. I don't know. But maybe that's just me being the Mac hater in the room, Tom.
No, I think you absolutely have a leg to stand on there. I do still think in this setting, I would have still given it to Michael Horvat in this as the kicker. But as you said, Laurier's offense was just so fantastic that they scored touchdowns more often than they needed to kick field goals. So Dawson Hahn get a real to showcase how good his kicking is in this one, where McMaster obviously really struggled to score touchdowns consistently. So Michael Horvat gets more attempts, and he's done a great job. Obviously, he was an All-Canadian last year as well, albeit for punting than kicking, but still, it's not like it's a bad kicker that they've given this to by any means. But Dawson Hodge is certainly, we saw his performance dip down last year, and to see a resurgence and see him get back to form was really great this year. Very surprising not to see him on here, especially the thing that really surprises me is that I don't mind obviously Horvat getting that kicking recognition, but the fact that he's a first team punter and a second team kicker, I was a little surprised at that. I figured that you would have picked one or the other, but obviously shout out to Michael Horvat, another hell of a year.
Most certainly. Tom, we'll obviously talk about these more so at the game day live that we're going to do at the Yates. So obviously with you hearing this, you lovely folks out there tuning in week after week, send us your thoughts and would love to talk about them. Whatever notes you have, if you think we're dead wrong, or who do you think was a snub, who do you think was more deserving, let us know. We'd love to talk about it on the game day live. But let's put that to bed right now and get into our C to C action to set up the three other championship games happening across the country. Tom, the floor is all yours. Take it away, sir.
Let's start out. You know what? Let's switch things up. We're going to start out west this time. We see the Battle of Saskatchewan. The Regina Rams travel to the Saskatchewan Huskies for the Hardy Cup in a matchup that I don't think anybody saw coming. I think it would have been a stretch to see either one of these teams play in this. I think Saskatchewan a little bit more likely than Regina, but I don't think anybody predicted Saskatchewan versus Regina in this one. And when you look back at the games this season, these are very tight games. The first game of the season that happens, Regina wins the game 33-28. This is in Regina. But once again, not exactly a far drive between Regina and Saskatoon, but they win the first one. And in October, in the second last week of the season, Saskatchewan gets the W, 22-20, followed up by 10 points in the fourth quarter in order to get that dub. This is going to be a very tight game. It's going to be a very grinded out game, most assuredly, with how well both of these teams have played. I really love, once again, the quarterback play from both of these squads. With Saskatchewan, Anton Ammonrud, like I mentioned previously, he is that classic gunslinger of a quarterback where he is going to throw up the ball. He is going to give his guys some real opportunities. And when you've got guys like Daniel Weeb, like a Rhett Varva, Dawson Liena as well, you can afford to just say, you know what, I'm going to throw it up to my guys. I'm going to see who wants to come down with it, because a lot of times they do, but it does lead to him throwing a lot of interceptions when maybe he could have gotten away with something a little bit safer, like a crossing route or a drag or something along those lines. But that's who this dude is, and you're not going to get one without the other. The other aspect of this Saskatchewan potent offense is the running game.
Yeah.
And is Riker freaking Frank. The way that he can run the ball has been outstanding this entire year. And that last game that they won, he goes 19 attempts, 85 yards, and a touchdown. And he also has 4 catches for 22 yards in that game. So he's always going to be somebody to really watch out for. What I will say is in the first game of the season, they held him pretty well. Riker Frank, 17 attempts for 64 yards, and he still has the 1 touchdown, but still, we saw a lot of really great things from Regina's defense. But when you look at this Regina team, once again, it has to come back to the offense. Noah Peltier has been playing some of his best football into this year. 26 for 31 in their first meeting, 359 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. I mean, Deshaun Mims, Renzel Arenaza, Nicholas Sirleaf, Olivier Savard. You've got some guys on here on the receiving core that are doing some great things. Deshaun Mims, 9 catches for 135 yards and 1 touchdown in that first meeting. Renzel Arenaza, 7 catches, 91 yards and a touchdown. And Nicholas Sirleaf, 3 catches, 62 yards and another touchdown. So it's not like he's just got one outstanding receiver. to just huck a ball up to and hope they'll come down with it. He does a great job of getting the ball out and really making sure that he's capitalizing on everything. Now, once again, you go back to the second game that they had, and I know I'm jumping all over the place here, but I'm really trying to just paint the picture of how close these games are. In the second game of the season in October, Noah Peltier, 20 for 38, 235 yards, no touchdowns, one interception. Marshall Erickson, their leading running back, 13 attempts for 58 yards, no touchdowns. So you start looking around at this team and you say, who are the people who are starting to come alive? Who are your tried, tested, and true players to really lean on here? And in this one, I mean, you have to start looking at the Saskatchewan Huskies. Sure, they haven't won a Hardy Cup in a couple of years, and sure, they had a different quarterback back there. But Riker Frank was along for the ride in those wins. A lot of these other players were there for these wins, and especially this coaching staff. They know how to win and they know how to do it well. I know I'm just going to blitz through these here, and I'm not sure if you have any commentary on this, my friend, but I am going with the Saskatchewan Huskies in this game. I think they get back to form. They win another Hardy Cup and get a chance to host a semifinal playoff game.
No, and I love going with the team that's obviously been there before. The win for Regina over Manitoba is perhaps such a meaningful thing in the way it ended. Sask over UBC obviously was pretty darn exciting at the end. So I just think that, yeah, for Sask, the been there, done that quality, some of those guys you mentioned. But you know what? It's great offense meets great defense with these two clubs when you go by the numbers, and Regina being able to take the ball away, get to the quarterback. It'll be really interesting. And if Sask tries to grind it out with Riker Frank, obviously, as you highlighted, Regina's already shown that they can limit him at times, but I just look at those weapons, and it's the known for me sitting here with having seen Sask and two Vanier's in this decade. So yeah, I'm going with the known commodity there. But hey, always nice to see when a bit of that underdog is able to make its way there. So I'll go with you with Sask on the day here.
From there, we continue our way east, skipping over the OUA to save that for last, and we start in the RSEQ, where once again the Dunsmore Cup sees Montreal Cataban take on the Laval Rouge et Or, this time in Quebec City for, I believe, at time of recording, close to, if not a sold-out crowd, once again in the Dunsmore Cup, arguably the best venue to watch a U Sports football game in a sold-out crowd in Quebec City. We talked about the two games out west and how close they were and how much parity there is there. You don't get much closer than the games in the RSEQ. The very first game, the home opener, Laval takes the W 23-22. And you go, wow, what a game, what a game. The next game is played in Montreal, and Montreal takes it. Final score in overtime, 32, Laval 31. Both of these games decided by a single point, albeit what I will say is higher scores than what we're used to seeing. Even in the first game, which 23-22, and you're thinking, Tom, what are you talking about? That's barely more than 3 touchdowns apiece. Yeah, that doesn't happen very often when these two teams play against each other because those defenses are just playing so fantastic. What I will say is that Arnaud Desjardins has really impressed me with the style of play that he has had in this season so far. He does a great job moving around the pocket and getting out when he needs to. I mean, he's averaging 296 passing yards per game here. 17 touchdowns to only 1 interception is an outstanding feat and certainly a huge improvement from what we saw last year. But I mean, if you're going to talk about outstanding quarterback play, you got to look over at the Montreal Cataban and see Mr. Jonathan Senecal, 290 passing yards he's averaging, 15 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. I mean, when you put the ball into Mr. Senecal's hands, special things can happen. And certainly when you're backed up with an outstanding defense like the Cataban have, it's very tough to win against Montreal in the best of cases. But I'm going with the Laval Rouge et Or in this one. Arnaud Desjardins last year against Montreal in 3 games, 1 touchdown pass to 7 interceptions. In these 2 games, he may have only won the first one they played against. 5 touchdown passes, no picks. He's playing outstanding football. Alex Duff and the rest of that running game has been decent, but his connection with his receivers and specifically in Olivier Cool has been nothing short of fantastic. In the first game that they played against in that win, Olivier Cool, 10 catches, 119 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's playing some of his best football, and they're coming alive at the right time. It's in Quebec City. It's the Laval fans that are around them. There's no better place to play youth sports football game. Give me the Laval Rouge et Or in this one.
And it feels fitting that these two teams just matching up every year would flip flop. Montreal taking it last year, Laval the year before that, so on and so forth. Let me at least make it interesting on the pick. I'll go with the incumbent on this one. Go with the Heck Creighton winner. Go with that defense, Jeremiah Ojo, and all those other guys that make that defense so stout. I mean, by the numbers, obviously, few teams are doing it like Laval is this year, but I'll just make it interesting and take the Carabin. Tom, that takes us out to the AUS. Take it away.
Once again, you talk about tight games. And while, yes, the RSEQ is obviously going to be the tightest, I mean, 2 games decided by a single point. You can't get much tighter than that. But Bishops, a squad that we have seen out east that has really been taking advantage of their outstanding play that's out there, beating a team like Acadia in the last game by 56 points or 50 points, excuse me, and even previously putting up 70 points in the regular season here. Bishops played against St. Mary's twice this year, and in both times, Bishops comes away with the victory. The first time that they played, Bishop wins 19-14, and the second time that they played, Bishops wins 19-14. The first time that they played, Bishops wins 18-11. Very tough, grind them out games by both of these squads here. You see what we saw from Justin Quirion. I mean, in his first game, 23 for 44, 351 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception, which once again goes back to the outstanding play from the St. Mary's Huskies. But in the second game, 19 for 39, 227 yards, 2 touchdowns, and another 2 picks. 3 picks so far against the St. Mary's Huskies is certainly something to take a peek at. But when you look at the way that St. Mary's has been playing recently, their offense at times has certainly been struggling. I mean, in the 2 games that we've seen 2 different quarterbacks. Michael Petrovsky from St. Mary's in the first game, and then the second one, Alan Young, who they've been seeing throughout the remainder of this season so far. Neither of them are really putting up outstanding numbers by any means, which goes back to, well, you have to rely on the pass because Bishop's defense is averaging only 53 yards per game. An unbelievable stat going into this. When you look at all the weapons, when you look at who we've just learned is the new MVP for the AUS and Justin Quirion and how well he has been playing, this Bishop's team has been playing, I am going with the Bishop's Gators to win this game. But I'd be lying if I didn't say I'm pulling for St. Mary's here because, guys, we can't have 2 teams come out of Quebec for both conferences. We can't have it.
Yeah, I mean, come on, AUS football. Like, this is a slippery slope to just like Quebec completely just annexing your league out there. But you mentioned them getting 3 interceptions against Quirion, the MVP, in those 2 games. Make no mistake, that didn't happen by accident. This is a St. Mary's team that, along with the Carleton Ravens, took away the ball in the air more than any other team this whole season. That defense is obviously so stellar, as you said, for Bishops, that you can compare them by the numbers to Laval. What they do in the run game is gaudy, to say the least. St. Mary is also limiting teams to less than 19 points a game. So allow me to take the dog in this game, or more specifically, the Huskies, and trying to rep the true East Coast football out in the AUS, Coach Samara, and all those things that we love about them. Let me, again, at least just to make it interesting, take St. Mary's in this one. Let's go. Represent the true East Coast football teams out there. Tom, thank you so much for another scintillating edition of C2C. Shall we bring it now into the OUA?
Have to finish with the best conference out there. Let's get into the Yates Cup.
Well, we have the rematch from the 115. It is the 116th Yates Cup Western visiting the Wilfrid Laurier Golden Hawks. Let's start by taking you back to September 14th. It's remarkable that this rematch is happening nearly 2 months to the day that in their first matchup, Laurier took out Western 43-28. And is again just a prime example of what we talked about of Laurier really having such a stellar offense, doing the thing that Western traditionally does to teams, where even when your opponent plays a good game, if they don't play a great game and match you beat for beat along the way, you will not keep up. And we saw on this day, obviously Elgersma does just terrific things, going 24 for 29, 385 in the air and 2 touchdowns. Evan Hillock, a bit less than efficient than we expect from him. 18 for 31, 322, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception on the day. We see like a high snap here or there. I think we might have seen a fumble happen on the day as well. I'm trying to find where that is. But again, a day where Western by no means played poorly. They played very good, as a matter of fact. Laurier just up there anteed that much more. We've talked with some of the Western guys from that day. They certainly have looked at that as a moment that maybe gave them a bit of clarity to reset. They went into the bye after that, and they have been nothing but spectacular ever since that moment. For Laurier, well, they've also been nothing but spectacular since that moment. It's the 2-time MVP trying to now win the piece of hardware that has been so elusive for him in his career, going up against this juggernaut Western team looking to go to win 4 straight Yates Cup championships. Tom, what are your initial thoughts looking at this matchup?
I mean, I think the big secret that we've been talking about, and not really a secret, the way that you beat the Western Mustangs is you have to get them outside of what they're typically known for doing. If it's a tight game, or certainly if Western is up to begin with, that's where they are the most comfortable. Once they have a 1-2 touchdown lead, that's when, hey, Keanu Yazbek, hey, Keon Edwards, how do you feel about going for 600 apiece and really just owning this clock and owning the ground game and beating down teams and opponents? In that first game, we saw the outstanding capabilities that Laurier had to capitalize on every single opportunity. I mean, Jahari Hastings comes up with a massive fumble to give Laurier the ball, and they score. And then immediately afterwards, they're able to get the ball back and score again. And now suddenly, the second time that Western has the ball, they're already down 14 points. And it doesn't help that we saw some uncharacteristic mistakes from the Western Mustangs in this as well. Not necessarily bad reads or anything, but bad calls, but stuff like bad snaps from Alex Berwick, who we know is an outstanding center. I mean, he's the first team all-star for centers for a specific reason. He's great at what he does, but bad snaps there. Certain fumbles, like you mentioned. Evan Hillock doesn't throw interceptions very often, but he threw one in this game. So something just very interesting to look at here, and saying, well, yes, there's only a couple of mistakes here or there that Western made. Because Laurier is now playing just fantastic football, they were able to capitalize on every one. And I mean, when you can have a guy like Taylor Elgersma go for 4 touchdowns combined with 2 in the air and 2 on the ground, 24 for 29, 385 yards, it doesn't hurt to have a quarterback who's playing some of his best football in this one as well. And I mean, what an outstanding matchup we're going to see in a Yates Cup for this one. Now, what I will say on the Western side of things, something that I realized, and shout out to Alex McComb with the Western Gazette, because he was the one who posted this and really blew my mind. There's only been 2 teams that have gone 4 straight Yates Cups. The 1973 to 78 or 77, because math, Western Mustang football team, and the 2000 to 2004 McMaster Marauders. The tying factor that unites both these teams,
oh gosh,
is Greg Marshall.
Yeah.
Greg Marshall was a player on those Western teams for 3 out of the 4 years. He was the head coach at McMaster for all 4 of those Yates Cup appearances, and he has the chance to be a part of it again in this game. Not only that, but when you look into all of the things that we talked about with not just losing the previous game to Laurier, to not have Evan Hillock as an all-star, Keanu Yazbek, to not have Mohsen Jamal or Keon Edwards or any of those guys as all-stars, that chip on Western's shoulder just seems to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to a team that doesn't always need extra motivation. They certainly have a lot of it going into this one.
We need to start making Greg Marshall t-shirts. Like I don't care what goes on it. Like we just need his, whatever it takes. That's ridiculous. Well, it's so fascinating where Western, because of the level of teams that they hang out in, they came into this year with a chip on their shoulder. Like, let's not forget how their year ended last year, getting kind of embarrassed against Montreal. Now, albeit that team was one of the best teams we'd ever seen in Montreal. Western doesn't care about that. We saw them get kind of embarrassed at home. Now against Laval 2 years ago, like that was a tight game till the end. But you go back and watch it, Laval was pretty well in control of that game. And this is a Western team that we came into this year saying, look, no one's going to care what happens in the regular season. And if you win the Yates, take your victory lap. I love it. And shout out to Alex McComb again, as you said, being the first team in 20 years to now complete that record of the four-peat. They have higher aspirations in this one. Tom, this game, though, when we look at the way that they match up in terms of on all facets of just by the numbers, by the players that we know who are going to be duking it out in this one, like it's Western, and that defense again, like, is so stellar. The 16 points per game they're giving up, Laurie at 22 points per game. But the thing that just still comes back every time you look at the numbers with Western is the fact that they still put up a league leading points in all of OUA, and I think they're up there near the top for all of U Sports. And to then still give up less than 200 passing yards a game. We know the names who are back there. We know what they do, but it's just year in, year out. We've become accustomed to seeing these high flying offenses give up yards in the passing game. Because at a certain point, when teams are going to have to chuck it downfield that many times, it's going to rack up. And not only that, like the proof in the pudding is also the fact that they're taking the ball away from teams. So when you have to pass it on them, you don't want to even be in that situation because they're not going to let you get it downfield. And if you do try it, they're either taking the ball away or they're getting to the quarterback. And again, we saw Soren Hallschmidt get his recognition. Connor Vrancisi has been doing good things at that other defensive end position. Obviously, Van Muhldorfer in the middle. We've seen him move around with Jude Buchanan, the way they're sending him out. It's really more than anything to me with the matchup with this club, just what that defense has been doing that is just and the creativity and showing these different fronts that I think is so special. Now, I don't want to talk too much about them without then flipping the script. Because again, for this Laurier team, it's, so impressive. Obviously the infrastructure of Coach Van Moorkirk being there. Obviously, what a just outstanding Hall of Fame caliber guy he is. But just looking at the turnover on that front line with Brandon Omanua moving on from the program, Ife Onyameninum, Patrick Burke Jr., and then being able to fill in with these guys, our guy in Harnour and how easily he assimilated into that program, seeing Grigorsik move into that middle linebacking position, taking over for one of the best defensive players in the league last year in Onyameninum, and then seeing the ascendance in a guy like Omari Hastings on that defensive line, being able to do such great things for them. This is a game where, frankly, as high-powered as these offenses are, and we sometimes see this come this time of year for the Yates Cups, and it plays into the cliche. I think this is a day where it's going to be a function of the defense winning the championship between these two clubs. I don't think we're going to see the stellar offenses be shut down altogether. But when you look at the defense these two teams play, how good they are on their special teams units, that's, I think, where you're going to find the margins that are going to separate them on this day.
Yeah, I mean, when you have two offenses that can score the ball and they can score very quickly, it's really going to come down to who can get the most amount of stops here. And the one thing that I will say is that while, yes, Laurier lost a lot of key guys from that front seven, The thing that makes me a little nervous is in that playoff game against Queens, when you and I were live in person, Anthony Leo was certainly able to do some special things there, but a lot of the catches, or at least a few of the catches that guys like Matt Camillo, Nico Logan Walton, even Nathan Falcone, I think, were just jump balls where the Queens receivers were able to outjump the defensive backs that they were going up against, which I don't know. It just makes me a little bit nervous for how things have been going so far. And certainly when you look at a passing attack from Western, I mean, Evan's going to come out firing. He was always going to, but certainly with a chip on his shoulder, you know that he's going to come out with something to prove in this one. You know that if Seth Robertson is healthy, and I think that he's going to be dressed, he does have a high ankle sprain, and that those are always lingering. The only way to get rid of them is by staying off your feet. And if Seth has anything to say about it, he's going to be busy for the next 3 weeks here. But I'm just a little nervous about that Laurier defensive secondary. Please feel free to prove me wrong, like guys like Shahari Hastings, Harnur Dollywall, and everybody else in there. But I just saw a couple of things from that Queens game that I was a little nervous about. I actually really loved the progression that we've seen from the Laurier front seven. I think that defensive line is playing very well. Chisenham and Senenham is in a load in the middle. And while we don't really say his name all that often when you come down to stats, it's because he's eaten up two offensive linemen every time consistently, allowing his guys like an Ethan Gregorcic to come out and around and to make some great plays. Now, one thing that we did see from Anthony Leo is that he seemed to lose Ethan Gregorcic in the middle, which is why he had three pass breakups and the one interception, which easily he could have had three interceptions in that game. I don't think Evan's going to do that. I don't think Evan is going to mistake where a linebacker is and try to throw to a bad spot by any means. It's all going to be what can you keep in front of you and how can you limit them, not allowing them to do their thing in the pass game. And then, oh, by the way, even if you do happen to do that, you still got to contend with a fantastic offensive line, two running backs that I'm sure feel slighted as well, not be having any all-star call-outs, and a dude, especially in Keanu Yazbek, that has been playing some outstanding football and is not afraid to run dudes over when he gets a chance to.
Yeah, and you know what? You bring up Ethan's name in the middle, and he's a guy where we obviously saw last year for Western, our dude, Mr. Knocktober and Brian Garrity winning the MVP for the Yates Cup. It was like 6 for 6 on field goals, like getting the one extra point kick, like outstanding performance by him. But in the sense of MVP, often is an offensive player or often a quarterback on the day. So it went to a kicker last year where I think like this, I think if you're Coach Gaetan Richard and looking at Laurier, I feel like for Laurier, I mean, these offenses are so similar. You look at the receiving cores that they have. You have your just like can do everything guy in either Seth Robertson or Ethan Jordan. You have your guy with just the great hands who can go deep for you on any play, looking at Raiden Thorne or Mohsen Jamal. And then you have your downhill threat on those crossing routes in Leomio Talayo in one corner and then Braden Masseri in the other. But sticking with the offensive side for Western to look at like Ethan Gregorcic, I think for those defensive backs for Laurier, yeah, as you said, obviously you got to win those one-on-one matchups. And those are some big dudes coming at you in terms of just like the bit major play potential that they bring to the table. From all the creativity we've seen from Western offensively, showing all these read option looks, showing all these guys bombering in on different sides, lead blockers and things like this. For Ethan in the middle, being able to both support that run game where you have an all-star laden O-line for Western, which is no surprise, and two running backs, which, again, on top of the fact that we know they're great, might be coming in a little pissed off. But if you're not playing honest, then Evan's going to be sending that ball to a guy like Masseri coming over the middle. We saw going back to the MAC game, where he'll use his H-backs coming out of the backfield. And when you're expecting, oh, it's a run situation, now all of a sudden the guy's leaking out. To me, you know what? That defensive back core, yeah, maybe they'll lose a matchup here or there. I think you can at least try and contain Robertson and Jamal by saying, and Dasani McIntosh that we're seeing now, right? Of just being like, hey, look, let's just not get beat for something big. But the way that Western can have your eyes and your feet moving laterally and then come downhill on you, then get the ball into a guy like Brady Masseri, that's where I think it's going to be really difficult for them on this day. And where, again, I look at a guy like Gregorczyk and say, okay, young kid, this is a day where if Laurier comes away victorious and it's the defensive matchup that we're looking at, he's the guy that we're saying, oh my goodness, he didn't look like a second year kid in the matchup. He looked like a wily vet. He was channeling the spirit of the great linebackers we know stepped up big in these games for teams in OUA history. Now, flipping the script though, because if we look at in the details, we see that all these incredible guys that Elgersma can get the ball out to. The matchups are just so amazing to think about getting to see Ethan Jordan matching up against Kojo, getting to see Laomi matching up, against, I guess maybe it might be a do before in the slot there, seeing a guy like Jackson Finley trying to contain Raiden Thorne going on those deep shots. What Tanner Nelms has done this year, though, has been so spectacular. And the way that our guy in Todd Stones Galloway is willing to go into some clearly obvious passing looks and then show the run look, going to where they might actually be a bit vulnerable, but they got a guy like Laomi blocking. And the way that Tanner gets downhill seems like an awesome prospect for them in this one. That Western defense has been so good all year long. The defensive backs, their ability to get pressure and bring pressure. How do you look at that matchup with how explosive Laurier is, how consistent they can be on the ground game, and where Western might have their advantages?
I think for all of these squads, when you look at offense and defense for both teams, 3 out of the 4 have been playing at a high level pretty much the entire time. And I would say that the 4th team that I'm referring to is the Western defense. Not that they haven't been playing at a high level. They have been, but they found another gear and they found something extra going into the last part of the season here. And that little bit of an extra is from that defensive line. Max von Muhldorfer has been playing fantastic, but Soren Hallschmidt, you've mentioned this a couple of times. He has 5 sacks in 2 playoff games so far and has been really getting after the quarterback, which you and I have both said that's the one thing that this Western team has been missing, a consistent pass rush with just your 4 guys. They're now starting to get that. It's going to be a little bit different in this game because as we were talking about briefly last review pod, at least talking with our guy in Zach Scotto, Coach Zach Scotto, he flips his offensive lines. So instead of having a left tackle, a typical left tackle, left guard, right tackle, they have a field and boundary. So now you're constantly flipping in that regard. And what does that mean? You're always going up against the same guys. You're not having to flip-flop based on the rush and the quick on the defensive ends. You're always going up against the same guys. And to see a consistent matchup between Cooper Hamilton and Soren Hallschmidt, that's a pretty fantastic thing to certainly be watching here. But it allows that Laurier offensive line to focus in on 1 or 2 players rather than the entire D-line, as long as they continue to flip that way. I expect Western to certainly bring some pressure here. I think Riley McLeod is fantastic when he's able to stay at depth. He does blitz, but I haven't seen him really wow me with how he like getting off of blocks, especially if an offensive lineman is the guy to pick him up. So I would expect him to stay back. I wouldn't be surprised to see a little saw action, especially with sending Max Nixon off. And like you have mentioned previously, they've got no problem lining up Jackson Finley, putting him into the box and having him as a second defender and allowing those outstanding defensive backs to just play man. I don't expect them to be playing man very often against this Laurier team because one-on-ones with Ethan Jordan, with Raiden Thorne, Laomi Ochitolio, Ryan Spate, Jace Atkinson, one of those guys is going to come free, and you're not going to be able to get home in 2 seconds with Taylor. So really interested to see that matchup more than anything, this Laurier offense against this Western defense, because I do think that this Western defense has gotten better since the last time that they played.
It certainly has. To that point, I'm curious to see if Coach Galloway, what type of short game looks he tries to get into the mix, what type of screen game action he brings in, because that's always that catch-22 there where you could say, sure, if you try to play man, bring pressure, that eventually you're going to have a tough time, even though, again, as far as man defenders go, Western, I mean, both these teams try up as good a guys as you can get. But if you are running those vertical shots down the field, you're asking your quarterback to get into that 5-step drop and need that extra bit of time. So I think this is where we might see a little more creativity. Not that Coach Galloway isn't, but it's funny to think where Western traditionally is that offense, is that defense where it's like, the playbook, we're just going to execute better. And now they're coming in and Coach Galloway, um, not that I don't know, his reputation's, we can break down Coach Galloway's coaching style, but we know that he's a well-rounded approach in terms of the pass, in terms of the run. I don't think necessarily a specific reputation of being like trick play guy or anything like that. It's a well-rounded offense, but we're seeing now where I'm curious where he brings in a little maybe bit of that creativity to try to offset some of the things that Western could do, because I don't think Western's just going to want to sit and play coverage all day. I think they've been showing so many things to be able to make opposing teams uncomfortable. And yeah, bringing Jackson down to the box, especially, and we read his name off earlier today with how great Tommy Silcox has been, earning a first-team rookie nod on the year. The fact that you can still put him back there and have a do before and have Kojo and have Jacob Saunders and have all these guys playing coverage, I think they'll have to get into some of those short game looks, maybe a couple of those screen looks. Tom, okay. We've talked about these defenses. We're talking about how explosive these offenses are. The special teams nods here. From a kicking standpoint, man, Dawson Hodge versus Brian Garrity, that's a beautiful matchup. From the return standpoint, we obviously know Tayshawn Jackson. We don't need to tell you. You can check his record now. OUA All-Star in Tayshawn Jackson. And for Western, we've obviously seen a number of guys back there. Roman Campanero's really come on strong. We saw last year Daniel Kabongo being a great returner for them, and Braden Massera returning kicks as well. Looking at it from the special teams angle, and I didn't mean to move it off that last point, the conversation we're having, if you still want to break that down. From this angle of the game, because from my eyes, again, thinking it's going to be a defensive battle, that means the special team is going to play a huge factor in it. Where are you seeing the swings from that side of things?
Well, yes, like you mentioned, Dawson Hodge, Brian Garrity is going to be a hell of a matchup. If you're asking me between the two of them, who I think is going to do better, you've named off the stats previously. It's Mr. Knocktober, Brian
Yeah.
Garrity. He's the man to watch and how well he can play under pressure in these tight games. I mean, he's been doing it for a number of years now, playing on this Western Mustang squad. So I think that he's definitely got the edge in this one. When you look at the return game, while certainly Daniel Kabongo, like we saw last year, has some capabilities, Braden Masseri has had some decent returns, and Roman Campanero has even taken one back in his first year here. Tayshawn Jackson is just a different animal. We've seen him and his best take over games. I mean, still, when we look back at that Laurier versus Guelph game earlier in the season, Laurier won by 9 points. All 9 of them were special teams, albeit 2 of them were from a safety that Guelph had to give up. The other 7 that came from Tayshawn Jackson taking one back to the crib, completely changing the dynamic of that game. Helping out even in the McMaster game. Initially, that was a tight game. McMaster actually leading at one point. Tayshawn Jackson takes one back to the house to give them that spark on offense. I think that Tayshawn has the ability to give an additional spark to either team, well, to Laurier's teams, whether that's offensively or defensively, oftentimes both, in the outstanding play that he has. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be a touchdown. Just getting the ball and flipping the field or getting a fantastic return in that sense is going to be very, very important. But what I will say is on these cover teams, you do have a guy like Jackson Finley coming down there. And we've seen that highlight of the outstanding form tackle against your Ottawa GGs the very beginning of the season here. You know that they're going to come down correct. You know that this Western team is well coached no matter what. Tayshawn Jackson's ability to be as shifty as humanly possible is really what is going to help him in this one, certainly. So I'm giving the edge to the Laurier Golden Hawks in the return game, but it's gonna be a great game to watch, most definitely.
Absolutely. And honestly, like, we never even talk about Oliver Griffiths, punting the ball for Western, which, I mean, hey, when you're Western, sorry if you're their punter. We're not going to ever talk about you all that much. We know that Dawson Hodge does it all for them. But when you look at what Griffiths does in the punting game, he's pretty well toe for toe, step for step, whatever, foot for foot, along with Dawson Hodge. His 8 punts within the 20 compared to Hodge's 9. His average of 42 on his punts to Hodge's 41.4. So from that standpoint, they're neck and neck. And I love you bringing up the fact that, yeah, Jackson Finley, like they can just throw out all these guys. Like they can have Finley, they can have a do before, they can put Kojo out there as their gunners out there. And you can say the exact same thing for Laurier and the guys they can put out there. Tom, I think the last thing I'm going to bring up is we know that Western, since that game, both these teams have been stellar. Western, really looking at that defense, has been so spectacular since that moment, and we know that they've gotten better, if only by the fact that we've seen Kojo Odum return, and we know at his best he is one of the best. And I still harken back to the loss in 22 against Laval and the thought of if Kojo could have been there to go on Kevin Mittal. Not that you shut down the guy; he was the Heckrite winner for a reason that year. It could certainly have limited him. And we've talked about how great Malik Cote has been, Jahari Hastings, Harnier Dollywall. But you mentioned the interception that Evan threw that was a bit uncharacteristic. That was Ethan Bayfield taking that away. And I don't know his status, but we haven't seen him for the Golden Hawks in a couple weeks here. That's worth noting. Because again, for stellar passing teams to then look at the defenses and be able to say, in the secondary, for a team in Western that, as we've talked about, has been picture perfect all year long, despite the points that they're putting up. Laurier, on the other hand, they're giving up just a shade under 400 yards. Pardon me, that's their total yards per game. Pardon me, about 262 yards in the passing game. That gets them towards that bottom half a little bit. We know that by the numbers, they're excellent. And obviously, teams have to throw it on them because they score so much. Already kind of made that case for Western, that teams haven't been able to do that, despite the fact that teams also are falling behind on them. We know that Kojo's back. We don't know Ethan Bayfield's status. I think that's the last note I really wanted to pull out of this one, as just a data point to be able to look at in comparing these two teams. Because, man, you can look at by the numbers, and Western might have a bit of an edge in some of these categories. You look at that matchup from earlier in the year and you say, well, Laurier got him. They got him pretty good at home, and this is in Waterloo again. What angles, what data points, what are we not, what bit of juice are we not squeezing out of this? Lemon would be the wrong metaphor, because lemon normally means something that's a dud, and this is going to be the antithesis of a lemon. It'll be a pamplemousse of a game. It'll be a delicious grapefruit of a game. What are we not reading into in this one?
I mean, once again, you look at the potential similarities between these teams. Seth Robertson dealing with a high ankle sprain of some kind, hoping that he is healthy and ready to go back, because he's an electric player to watch, certainly. But I think even if he is back, he's not going to be at 100%. We saw Raiden Thorne go down with a bit of an injury against Queens the last game. I believe he did come back in that one, but that's still something certainly to be watching here. And when you look at the similarities continually in this receiving core, you look at a guy like Braden Masseri, who is a big, strong dude, has no problem catching a ball over the middle or fighting off 4 defenders to get into the end zone. I would say that's pretty similar to a guy like Laomi Ojatalayo, if not giving a little bit more to Laomi, because I think he's got the speed on Braden in that sense. You look at a guy like Ethan Jordan and a Mohsen Jamal type, and certainly Ethan Jordan has the numbers, and he was in that conversation for being an MVP for a certain reason, but I would argue that Mohsen Jamal certainly has a lot of those capabilities. We've seen him do some great things last year as well. I mean, Taylor versus Evan Hillock. This is exactly what you sign up for. This is why you watch OUA football, to see matchups like this and to see both of these guys go. I mean, Evan doesn't need all that much of a chip on his shoulder an additional help for that chip on his shoulder to go into this one. He certainly has all the ammunition that he could possibly hope for. Taylor doesn't need any help getting up because he's always up for games, especially being the London kid playing against Western. Yes, he got the win this season, but he hasn't won very often, if at all, in any other season against these Western Mustangs. And I'm sure his boys back in London have made him hear about it. So I'm thinking that he's going to be up for this one as well. When you look at all of the capabilities that both of these teams have, these are the best of the best. There's a reason why they are in the Yates Cup. It's not easy to get into this game, just to get into this in the OUA because of all the other outstanding teams that are here. But there's a reason why both of these teams are. And if you're not at Laurier because it's sold out as of yesterday, you gotta be watching this game because my goodness, you're going to see some of the best football across the country in Waterloo.
I love that we finished by bringing it back to these two quarterbacks because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. These are the leaders of these teams. And yeah, both these guys coming in with the chips on their shoulder, the London connection for Elgersma, and a guy in Evan Hillock who has been nothing but consistent his entire career and a champion to boot at multiple levels of OUA and U Sport football. Yet somehow, aside from the year when he was the Vanier MVP in his rookie year, he ends up leaving the season with everyone saying, well, hey, great team. He had an MVP at running back, a good defense. Daniel Valente Jr. at the back end there. Evan held you back. Oh, hey, man, oh, man. That was a great defense from Montreal. But you know what? Hey, look, Evan just couldn't get it done. He was putting the ball on the ground, putting the ball on the turf. What? Can't get it done. He's holding them back. Again, if they lose this game, they're still only the 3-time Yates Cup champions of this decade. Vanier Cup champs in 2021. And the fact that this kid has been in high leverage games year after year, week after week, with nothing but disrespect going his way, capped off with not making an all-star team this year, very likely will exit his career without an MVP. And, I'm not going to make too much of that because so many great players have come and gone through this league and not sniffed an MVP. And that's the breaks. We only hand out one of them. But Evan wins Yates Cups. And he's winning another one on this day. He's going into Waterloo, and his Stangs are picking up the win on the road. Give me Western, baby. I think it's going to be a great game. I think the defenses are going to come to ball. I think the quarterback play will be strong. You add in Mr. Knocktober and Brian Garrity coming through with some clutch kicks to give them those points ahead when it matters. I'm taking Western, Tom. Let's go.
I mean, it's never a hot take to take the Western Mustangs to win a Yates Cup because they do it so damn often. And when you look at legendary coaches, I mean, yes, we have Glenn Constantine out in the RSEQ, but everything that Coach Greg Marshall has been doing his entire career, both as a player and a coach, you have to look at just pure excellence that comes out of any program that he's a part of, whether that's the McMaster Marauders in the early 2000s or now his Western Mustangs at his alma mater from 2007 until now. Like we mentioned, he's only not been in 2 Yates Cups. And you and I were responsible for those.
Yeah, baby.
Something that you and I very much are proud of, but still, he doesn't lose very often in this game. And I completely see where you're coming from. But I'm going with the Laurier Golden Hawks in this one. Taylor Elgersma is on a hell of a game, or a hell of a streak, throwing to one of, if not the best receiver in all of Canada in Ethan Jordan, and closely followed behind with Raiden Thornley, Omi Ojatolao, Jason Atkinson, Ryan Spade, all of those guys. I think that Laurier finds a way to win. Any other team, I'd be nervous about all of the accolades that they have won and all of the pageantry that's happened. You finished 8-0. You have the MVP. You've got the coach of the year. You've got all of these things here, most definitely. But Laurier still has a chip on their shoulder. They have eyes on greater aspects. I think they come away with this when they stay focused and they get the dub to finally beat Western in a Yates Cup.
Man, whichever way you slice it, it's gonna be an outstanding game. I don't think we're betting on anything but that, regardless if we're winding up on either side of our picks. And then when you extrapolate to the possible matchups, and not to overlook whoever comes out of the AUS, and not to overlook the prospect of Can West knocking out the RCQ in the other semifinal. But if I may be so bold to just say the prospect of getting, Taylor versus Senecal, possibly the last year and the this year has Creighton Award winner, or getting Evan with his revenge game against Arnaud Desjardins and the Laval Rouge, or again his revenge game against the Montreal Carabins. Man, oh man, whichever team we get representing our conference, assuming they take care of business in the semifinal. And that's, not no guarantee the way that those two teams in St. Mary's and Bishops especially have been playing, but we are en route for a great Vanier Cup in Kingston. But we get there one step at a time, the next step being the 116th Yates Cup Western at Laurier. Tom, outstanding job by you as always. The C2C breakdown was immaculate as always. Final thoughts going into championship weekend of U Sport football.
It's insane to me that we saw such an amazing game between Laurier and Western the last time that they played. And that game is the largest margin of victory between all of the previous matchups and all of the other championship games that are going on in this weekend. This is going to be arguably one of the best weekends of football for U Sports that I can possibly remember in a long time. I think every game here has the potential for anybody to win. There's not really one where it's like, okay, this is hard set here. I wouldn't even really be all that surprised if Noah Pelletier and everybody at Regina was able to get that W there and win the Hardy Cup. This is just such parity within U Sports. I think this speaks to the outstanding players and the outstanding coaches that we've got all across our great country here. The fact that this game is growing and starting to get better and better on the field just means that we, as the people who cover it, have to get better and better about making sure that we get everybody's story out there. So I can't wait to be watching the Yates Cup live and in person with you, my man, and breaking everything down on our game day live for the Yates Cup. The first time that we've ever done a live show for the Yates Cup. This is going to be a little bit something special.
It's a great moment for us, and as you said, it's a great moment for Canadian football with these matchups that we have from C to C. It's St. Mary's at Bishops, it's Western at Laurier, it's Montreal at Laval, and it's Regina at Saskatchewan. Who will be representing their conference in the national semifinals? Well, you'll have to tune in to hear us talk about it later this week right here at the 55.